And out of the blue, she was in perfect health. She had just turned 74, and she passed away just very unexpectedly. We were all shocked. And 6 months after that, I was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer. And just a lot of things going on for me that it was not the easiest thing to do, to come home from work and work on research and writing that was required to complete this project. And at one point, when I was sharing this with my friend about this story about Charles and how he found the strength to survive and fight for his survival the way he did, she pointed out to me that, these stories are a gift. And they're a gift to all of us, Scott, the things that these people went through. And with each person that I researched as I went through this project, I found in every one of them this incredible will for survival. And, I faced that myself this year where, you used to think to yourself, what if you went on deck and all the lifeboats were gone? How would you feel? When I was a little girl, I almost drowned. My family and I, the four of us, were on the Wisconsin River, and our canoe capsized, and the water was probably about as cold as it was that night for Charles and the others aboard the Titanic. It was very cold, but we were rescued by some fishermen, and everything was okay. But I know that feeling of being close to not making it. So I think, many of the ways that I came into this project and found the strength, the energy to complete it has been with, finding the survival in these people and being inspired by them. And with Charles, when he saw that the lifeboats were gone, he did not just cave and give in. He saw the deck chairs that were still on deck, and these were heavy wooden chairs that were kind of sprawling. You could lay down on them. They were similar to what a Chase lounge would look like today, like a lawn chair at the beach type of thing, only they were wooden, very heavy wooden. And he thought, if I can get these deck chairs into the water through the portholes, because the railing was too high to get them over, maybe there will be one for me to hang on to when I get into the water, because he knew he was going to hit that water. And so Charles single-handedly began throwing deck chairs into the ocean to prepare himself, rather than saying, well, boy, this is a terrible fate and I have to just accept it. He was finding things to do to help himself survive.
At this point, too, the Titanic, it's already starting to lean over to the side, I think the port side. And can you paint a picture where lifeboat number 10 is located, where he is trying to get off the ship? How is the ship leaning? I think there was a woman who was trying to jump to a boat, and then she ended up dangling upside down because she missed it on the first jump. So how is the ship oriented at this point as he's throwing deck chairs into the water and trying to figure out how he can escape and survive?
You're right. It was leaning to one side and it was not even. So I always think of that too. What was it like trying to keep their footing when they were trying to do things like throwing deck chairs overboard? As far as the specifics about, the Titanic was pointing upwards. And as far as the specifics, I know that he was on a deck throwing chairs over.
So what happens after he throws some of the deck chairs down? Then does he go somewhere else in the ship, or what happens?
That's when he goes and has a drink of water. He finds a small galley and takes a drink. And that's when almost immediately he sees the hundreds of passengers running up the deck. And we can assume that these were probably passengers from third class steerage who were able to get up to the poop deck at that time. So he becomes part of that group. He's just sort of swallowed up by them, and becomes part of the group. And inevitably, they all hit the water. And Charles tread water for 2 hours that night, 28 degrees. And, the comic relief part of it being people making the comment, well, because of the alcohol that he drank. And there's all this debate about, was it the alcohol or would it help you or not? Or, personally, from what I've been able to decipher from the research, I don't think he had that much alcohol that it would have made a difference. I think it's just more probably folklore that's developed because Charles was so transparent with the British inquiry officials, and he admitted that he drank that night. And I think it just became this, piece of Titanic folklore, an incredible one, but a folklore nonetheless. So he's treading water. As I said earlier, he said his hair doesn't even get wet. He is one of many, many people that night who are not able to get onto a lifeboat because anyone that was on a lifeboat would be thinking, oh gosh, if I, let someone else on this lifeboat, it may capsize. So, he found an overturned lifeboat with many different men on it. Most of them were crew. And he swam over to it. And on the first side that he approaches, he asks, can I get on? And they push him off. This is not an uncommon story with that night. What happened? They would push people away. And, in one instance, one of the things that I was really inspired by with relation to that is, someone says as they're pushed away from a lifeboat, he says, that's all right, boys. Keep cool. Good luck and God bless you. And again, Scott, I just think, would you have the strength to say that as you're being pushed away from a lifeboat? And that was not Charles. That was another passenger that someone told during the British inquiry that someone had responded that way. We don't know who it was. In the case of Charles, another great life lesson, about getting along with our coworkers and caring about our coworkers as friends. Sometimes it really pays off. He was spotted by a cook, Isaac Maynard, who was on the collapsible lifeboat that Charles was trying to get on. And he reaches out his hand to Charles. At this point, Charles is already on the other side, the second side of the lifeboat, where he's trying again, come on, guys, I got to get on. I got to get on. And Isaac Maynard reaches his hand out to Charles. And, can you imagine taking that risk? That would be an incredible risk when you're fighting for your own life out there on an overturned lifeboat that's full of men, that's pushing people off. Well, a little while goes by, probably about 20 minutes maybe, and all of a sudden they hear a voice from out in the dark. There are all these lifeboats out in the dark, and they're doing things like lighting ropes to be able to see whatever they can, but they wouldn't be able to see very far. And Charles hears a voice. We can take 10 more. He hears somebody from another lifeboat. We can take 10 more. And immediately he jumps on it, even though he's so tired at this point and hypothermia is already setting in. And he says to Isaac Maynard, "Let go me hand." And Isaac lets it go. And Charles is one of the 10 that gets on that lifeboat. Again, a moment probably when many of us would have thought, oh, to heck with it. I don't have the strength to swim over there. He found the strength. He got over there and he got on a lifeboat. He was picked up by the Carpathia, as were all of the survivors. The Carpathia, of course, was the ship, the hero ship that risked everything to go through this field of little icebergs and big icebergs and this whole field of different sizes of nothing but danger to it to try to save these people. When Charles gets picked up, he is so cold and his feet are so swollen, they have to put him into an oven, believe it or not. Yes. And he says, they popped me into the oven like one of my own pies. And that is how Charles survives.
And how long was he treading water at this point when he was trying to find a ship or a lifeboat to be able to enter?
Well, he says that in all, he was treading water about 2 hours, but that must include the time where he was holding Isaac Maynard's hand because he was not up on the lifeboat. He was in the water. So 2 hours total.
You know, it's funny when you were telling that story, I had heard the account of him as some sort of silly fun fact about history that, oh, did you hear about the man who drank so much he was able to survive in the cold water? And I don't think the human body works that way. It's not as if you go into some sort of hibernative state by drinking more and you have a higher cold tolerance that allows you to survive better. From what you read of his life, though, what do you think caused him to be able to survive? And if you haven't read anything, I'm just curious from your own speculation or your own inference on his life, why do you think he was able to make it? Was it that he just kept his cool and didn't panic? Did he have a physical hardiness that maybe other people would have frozen by then and he didn't? So why do you think he was able to survive?
Well, a couple of factors. Number one being his age. You know, he was 33. I know someone said to me once years ago, "You're perfect at 30." You know, she made that comment when I was turning 30. That's like your perfect age. You're like in the best shape. You've experienced enough of life, and you're at that point where you still full of hope. He had 2 little babies at home in Southampton. I'm sure, wanted to go back to see them. He was very hardy. His family shared with me that he, was not the greatest looking guy. He was kind of rough and tumble, and they actually told me that he looked a little bit like a prize boxer, that kind of physique. And like I said, that's why I shared those personal stories of my own, because I have found incredible inspiration from this man by learning his story and the truth about it.
Afterwards, I mean, it's not as he's a somewhat young man at this time. He has long years ahead of him. He can work. So what happens to him after the Titanic disaster?
One of the passengers, Barbara Colgrove, was traveling on the Congress from her home in Seattle, and she was alone when when the disaster occurred, and she was with 4 children, all under the age of 10. And she told the Associated Press that Joughin was incredible in assisting a great many people. And then she heard that he had fallen overboard. So what happened to Joughin after all of his experiences? He moved to New Jersey, believe it or not, in 1920. His wife had passed away, giving birth to their son, and he moved to New Jersey and married a woman named Annie Ripley. They lived in Paterson, New Jersey. And there he worked with food as well after many years of working on the oceans. So Charles worked in many capacities in New Jersey, including even with hot dogs at one point, as his family shared with me. And he continued to bake. He baked mincemeat pies. When his wife Annie would ask him for one, he didn't just make one, he'd make 30. And he loved to make lemon pies slathered in dazzling, fluffy meringue. He learned to bake on the Isle of Man, where the Joughin Bakery was. And it was located at 8 Michael Street. And what, interestingly enough, is tied to Charles is that at the Titanic wreck site, a plate from the Isle of Man steam packet company was found. And people wondered, well, where did this come from? How did this get on the Titanic? But as I mentioned earlier about those jerry-rigged stills that would be in the crew quarters, there was probably a stash of dishes that they would bring with them too, or a few things that they had collected along the way. So the assumption could be, thinking of Charles as, tucking away a plate from one of his journeys on the steam packet company ships, or not ships, they're on the steam packet company. Charles was very quiet about his experiences that night. He never spoke about them. That's why he made up the story about the polar bear. And he waited until the 1950s to open up about what happened that night. And the reason he did at that point was because he saw or heard about an article in the ladies'